I have always been a big fan of Johnny Lydon and the Sex Pistols, ever since my older brother Patrick came home with his newly purchased print copy of Never Mind the Bollocks, Here's the Sex Pistols, the first and only studio album by the punk rock group The Sex Pistols on Virgin Records. My brother Patrick, who passed away in 2007, 30 years after buying the album, was not only my inspiration for launching Radio Irish, as many of you already know, as I have talked about that in the past. Patrick was also highly inspirational in my life in turning me onto some great music and brilliant music artists in his lifetime. Some of the music, which I wouldn't have really gone out and bought myself. He kept on challenging me to listen to new bands, and the Sex Pistols was one of those bands. We all grew up with the Sex Pistols in our house, blaring from the record player because of Patrick, and frontman Johnny Lydon became part of the fabric of growing up in late 70s, early 80s Dublin, Ireland, in our house at least. I later went on to become a radio disc jockey in Dublin and regularly played P.I.L tracks on the air during the mid-80s, including Johnny Lydon's mega hit Rise, released in 1986. Rise, which remains one of my all-time favourite songs, was the first single from the fifth Public Image Limited studio album titled Album. The song was written by Johnny Lydon about apartheid in South Africa, and specifically about Nelson Mandela, as Lydon is reported to have stated in a 2013 Glastonbury interview. Interestingly, Rise was one of the group's biggest commercial hits, peaking at number 11 on the UK singles charts. The song contains the phrase, "May the road rise with you," which is an old Irish proverb, a blessing. And so with all my enthusiasm to finally get to meet the great Johnny Lydon, to wish him well with his new book, Anger is an Energy, I purchased a copy of the book in advance of a book signing at a bookstore in Ridgewood, New Jersey, where Johnny was expected to appear in person to sign books. I couldn't believe it. How did I find out about this? Well, I just happened to be up in Ridgewood one day and I passed the bookstore and there's a picture of Johnny Lydon in the window and some information about the up-and-coming book signing. So it was really kind of fate that I happened to be outside the bookstore to see that this signing was going on in the first place. Great, I thought. So off we went on a trek to Ridgewood, New Jersey, which is located down along Route 17. Traffic wasn't bad, we found a parking space in town easily enough, and I headed off to join a long winding line of about 200 to 300 people, all huddled together outside, holding their copies of Johnny Lydon's new book, Anger is an Energy, as the line moved along from outside to inside the bookstore, and finally downstairs, where there he was, Johnny Lydon, signing books, behind a counter, and looking in fine fettle altogether, being jovial with his customers, of which I was delighted to be one. This was my second book signing ever in my life. The only other author I've ever stood in line for to have them sign their book was for spoon-bending Uri Geller, the Israeli psychic, who signed his book Unorthodox Encounters for me in Dublin a little over a decade ago. That was the only ever book signing I'd ever been to prior to this. As I stood there in line, I began to think about Johnny, what I knew about him, and how much I had loved his music over the years. He's a big fan of Oscar Wilde, you know, as am I. So the line moved along at a jovial clip, and I looked forward to reading all about Johnny's Irish ancestry in the book. For a while, I chatted with some Polish lads who were also in line behind me and asked one of them to take a few photographs of me when I got to Johnny at the counter, which they said they would do, and for which I thanked them. Just as I approached Johnny's counter where he was signing books, I thought, let me see if I can pass on my Radio Irish business card on to his manager, who was standing next to him, And instead of taking Johnny's time up with silly chit-chat, I thought I'd use my very brief time with him to invite Johnny Lydon here to speak with me on Radio Irish about his new book. It made sense to me. I was there, so was he. I had my business card, and what's the harm? What's the big deal, right? What's the worst that could happen? I finally got to the man himself, slipped my Radio Irish business card discreetly on the counter between Johnny and his manager, and proceeded to have my book signed with the quickest chat I have ever had with any celebrity ever, after 3.5 decades of broadcasting. Seán McCarthy from Radio Irish. Johnny, how are you?
I'm fine, thank you.
All the way from Dublin. Are you going to join me for an interview someday, are you? Over the telephone.
You'd have to talk to the manager here.
All right, thanks a lot. All right, cameras. Take a picture.
Peace.
Thanks very much, man. Okay, God bless. Bye.
All right.
Johnny Lydon there, on the occasion of his signing my freshly purchased copy of his new book, Anger is an Energy. And seeing as Johnny insists anger is an energy, what more tribute could I possibly make than to have shared some of that energy right here on Radio Irish.
Broadcasting 24/7 to the Irish community, radioirish.com.